Hi, Shimrit. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hi, Grace. I'm so happy to be here. Happy Friday.
So to start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So I feel like one of the things that on your resume I thought was like really interesting is like, you have been working on various like different top Google product. Maybe like we could start with like, you started off your career as an engineer, and then you have been quickly becoming like, a really cool product manager at Google, and then you have been like leading the various different sector of like product team at Google, and now you're the VP of Google. So why don't we start with like what are some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shape you into who you are today?
Sure. All right. There's a lot in there. So let me try tackle it. So let's see a bit about my background. Um, I have an undergrad degree in math and computer science. Then, like you said, I went on to be a software engineer for a few years. I loved it. I thought it was a dream job. I was like, why would anyone do anything except be a software engineer? And then I learned of this really cool function called product managers. And they get to like talk to customers and they get to set the roadmap and tell engineers what to do. So I was like, actually, there is something even cooler. So I got excited about the product manager role. And so after a few years of being a software engineer, first in Tel Aviv and then in New York, I went to business school at MIT and kind of used that as a launching point into my career in product management. Um, so while at MIT, I interned at Apple, and that was really cool to see. And then I got to join Google full time in 2009. I was a product manager for Google Docs and Google Groups. So if you've ever shared a Google Doc, that was one of my first launches at Google 16 years ago. And, I have a soft spot for it in my heart. Then I famously or infamously, for those who remember Google Plus, I got to be the first PM on that. And actually, that was a really interesting time in my career because even though the product didn't pan out, it actually had a lot of very relevant learnings for me of, being super focused on product market fit before you go into scale, and a lot of things that I guess everyone kind of learns the hard way.
Mhm.
Then I moved to YouTube. I launched YouTube Kids. So that was 0 to 1. I was just having my second kid. So I was very deep into the kid space and excited about kids technologies.
Mhm.
And then I after a few years doing that, moved to lead YouTube Community,
Mhm.
which is all the short form engagement features of YouTube. And about 7 years ago, I joined Google Photos as the GM,
Mhm.
which also a few years ago kind of merged with Google One, which is
Mhm.
Google's consumer cloud offering. So that's kind of
Mhm.
at a high level a bit about my background. What are the lessons, the most important career lessons that I learned along the way? Um, I mean, I think that, so I would say maybe a few things. I loved being a software engineer, but actually being studying computer science in university was actually really hard. And that was a good first lesson around sometimes when you're studying something versus you're actually doing it in real life, it can be very different.
Mhm.
And so, studying something can be, grueling, but then doing it as a job is actually super fun.
Mhm.
And so, I think in life, dealing with some adversity is always part of the journey. And I think that is an important lesson. I think the second is when I reflect on my journey at Google, relationships were a big part of that.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I think, PMs in the industry more broadly, but definitely at Google, they're very well connected among themselves. And I think investing in those relationships, staying connected to that community is really important because A, of all the cool things that are happening. And B, when the time is right to make a move, you don't have to bootstrap those relationships. You can just be like, oh my God, I loved what we chatted about.
Mhm.
I'd love to learn more.
Mhm.
Um, and then C, I would say that in my career journey, everyone every few years kind of comes to an intersection of like, okay, well, what's next? And for me, when looking at what's next, I always look to balance out what are the things that I'm already good at that are going to be very valuable in this role? But also, what am I going to learn that I know nothing about, that I'm extremely uncomfortable about doing live in a leadership role, kind of learning this area? But I think, ultimately, I think most humans that I know are invigorated by that kind of learning and that kind of, discomfort. And so I would say finding roles that have a mix of what you know and what you don't know is really key.
Mm, I love that. I have so many questions there. So maybe we could start with launching, Google Doc. Obviously, I feel like this is like such a iconic moment as like, who have not used Google Doc like ever. So like I wonder when you're launching a product like obviously you said this on a different podcast about like focusing on the problem instead of the solution. Why don't we talk about like can you walk us through the journey of like how did you guys kind of like find the problem? Obviously, I feel like now it's very obvious, but like maybe because of like you're leading the product back then, like what were the user testing that you have done? And how many times that you have to chat with someone and how do you kind of actually discover their problem? Just because people could just throw a lot of information onto you, but like how do you kind of like process, what is something that I could actually build versus what are some stuff that like, that's not worth it?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I would say that, you know, different products that I've built and launched have been
Mhm,
at different maturity levels. So actually Google Docs
mhm,
when I joined actually was had already existed at Google as
mhm,
part of an acquisition that Google did in the space and
mhm,
integrated it into Google's product suite as part of
mhm,
email and other products. But the sharing of Google Docs in the way that we all know today, where you kind
mhm,
of type in someone's email address or share a link out to them or even post it publicly, that sharing model really did not exist in that
mhm,
way. And I think it was, my biggest focus at the time was thinking about, okay, well, what are the different modalities in which people want to share? Like,
mhm,
and what are the different needs that they have when they're trying to share either with a very small and protected group, or you're
mhm,
happy for anyone on that email thread to get this, or even if you want to publish something on the internet for everyone to see.
mhm,
And it's always really hard. Like, think about it, those are very different audiences. You have then different needs in terms of, well, who can comment, who can do something with this doc, who can copy paste. Um, so I think, squeezing that all into one dialogue and into one set of user flows was actually, quite a nuanced design challenge. And then doing so in the like in the broader paradigms of Google and the industry, because it doesn't live in a vacuum.
mm,
So I think working backwards from the audiences you're trying to cater to and what you would like to unlock for them, and then doing all the design trade-offs and making that really easy to do in quite a constrained space.
mm,
Maybe another example that I have that's kind of more 0 to 1 is when we built YouTube Kids.
mhm,
And so building YouTube Kids, at the time, we'd been hearing a lot, and it was my experience as a parent, definitely, that, parents loved watching YouTube with their children. And, it was, something that they loved doing. They loved, seeing like train videos or a documentary together or other things that you're watching. And so when you're designing a product like YouTube Kids, you're designing it, one, for like kids to be able to use it and navigate it, and that's a much different design paradigm than adults, because kids have smaller hands and they may, they have different reading aptitudes and things like that.
mhm,
And then you're also designing it for the parents. um, you're designing it to parents to be co-watching with their kids or to have parental controls like timers and things like that. So all in all, I think I've always, had the product philosophy that many people have, which is start with the people you're building for, what you're building, what problem you're trying to solve for them, and then only then go to sort of the solution. Because I think that in product, we constrain ourselves when we fall in love with a single solution too quickly.
mhm,
But if we're really focused on, getting to know the people using it, and really different ways in which the problem could be solved for them, then you're thinking expansively and you really opening yourself up for more opportunities.
Mm, I love that. I wonder, so like, how do you pick which project that you want to work on at Google? And obviously, maybe we could start with like your day to day at Google now. How like, so how like basically how do you like manage your organization to like setting up goals for yourself and everybody? And then we could talk about like, how do you pick which product to work on? Um, to I guess like at your own career journey, basically.
Yeah. Um, so managing, so maybe I'll start with the first question, was managing my own time. Um, Everyone has 168 hours a week.
Mhm,
Every single person in the world, Beyonce, Sundar, all the CEOs that
mhm,
admire, they all have only 168 hours a week. So you have to make it work with that time. And I do think, like, sometimes we think about time management as kind of like, oh, is it like productivity hacks or whatnot? And I think of it as like, look, it's the only resource that isn't generative. That once I've lost, August 15th, that's it. August 15th, 2025 is never coming back. So I think thinking about how we spend our time and proactively reflecting on when it was well spent versus not is probably one of the highest leverage things we can do as individuals and as leaders. For me, well, I always start my day with working out.
mhm,
I there really is never actually a day that I don't work out, and the reason why that's important is it really allows me to start the day with investing in myself and with creating a lot of energy for myself to show up for my team and for what's needed. I think if we're starting our day always at a deficit, then that gets really hard. And so, I always work out first thing in the morning. And then I try to have my day be a mix of course, meetings, reviews, one on ones. But then I also always block time to do deeper thinking and to think about, okay, well, bubbling up a level, looking at how we're doing as an org, looking at our products, looking at other products that do similar things in the market. What are we missing? And I think that as leaders, finding the right mix of like, what is the short-term focus that we're executing on versus what is that long-term focus of investments that we're making that we're not gonna have signals and if they pan out immediately. Having the right mix of that is really critical. And there's no algorithm. There are times in your career that you have to be like 90% focused on the here and now, and then times in your career where you actually have to take a step back and really think about much broader things. But maybe what I would say, it's never 100-0. There's
mhm.
always like a mix in that portfolio, and evolving that and reflecting on that and being like, oh, what do I need to change? What do I need to adapt? Is really key in my opinion.
Mm, I think that's like so important to, I guess, like, um, to start off your day with, I guess, like having the long-term focus. So when you're thinking about, I guess, like creating a product. So for example, let's say you're building YouTube Kids. Like, so for example, do you set a goal for a year? Say, by, maybe we start from January. By June, we have to launch like the product publicly, and then maybe by March or like maybe by like I don't know February, we have to launch like within YouTube internally. We dog food the product, and then and then maybe in April we test launch, and then on June we like actually launch to like everybody. So or like how do you kind of like how do you set up your own like project deadline for each deadline that's like realistic, but also like you know having efficiency within that domain. And then also I feel like because of Google is such a unique place, it's like one of the not one of the like it is the biggest company in the world. So like how do you even think about um because like when you launch there's like no failure rate. You can't let the product just like do like super crazy stuff. So how do you kind of evaluate the time standpoint on, having enough time to build something
Yeah.
very solid to um, push the launch, basically.
Yeah, I think there are a few good questions in there. So I'd start with beginning with the end in mind.
Hmm.
Beginning with the end in mind is probably one of the most important leadership tools of
Hmm.
defining what success looks like when we're going into a project.
Hmm.
And I would say that that's actually, I think that when you're looking at a 0 to 1 project, that's very different from where you're looking at a mature product,
Hmm.
because a mature product that you're iterating on, especially if you're at scale, like Google Photos, which
Hmm.
is which is a very scaled product.
Hmm.
So the things you're doing, they can sometimes feel like, oh, this launch is like a teacup in the ocean. Who
Hmm.
can even measure like how much this launch had moved the needle? But and that's why I think having metrics at different altitudes is really important. And I think about it just like if you were going to the doctor's office to get like a health panel on how you're
Hmm.
doing. Well, they're not just taking one metric, right? They're not just measuring your blood pressure, right? They're
Hmm.
measuring your height and your weight and your resting heart rate, and they may be doing a blood pool and checking your glucose level and a bunch of things, and all those signals give you a sense of the health of or how you're doing.
Hmm.
And I think it's the same in building products.
Hmm.
You have to have metrics that tell you how you're doing on breadth, and then you have to have metrics of how you're doing on depth.
Hmm.
um, and you have to figure out, I always like to start with depth and saying, let's make sure we really have found product market fit. And
Hmm.
usually depth gives us more signals to that. So things like DAO over MAU or DAO over WOW or WOW, daily active users, weekly active users, monthly active users, those ratios can give you good signals there. Monthly retention is a good metric for depth and product market fit. Um, and then you kind of have other signals that tell you, okay, and well, how many people know that this exists? How many people have tried it out? And that's more things like installs, things like monthly active users. You get that in other ways. But I think a mix of metrics is really important. And then the last thing I would say is quantitative is great, but you always, humans like to hear stories, and humans like to hear stories that have a beginning, middle, and end. And they love to understand, where are we in the story? Are we in the very early days of venturing into the forest, or are we in the last battle scene at the end? And I do think that effective leaders do a good job of course, relying on data, holding our organizations accountable, holding ourselves accountable, pivoting when we're not making the right moves in the right direction, and also explaining why we're doing what we're doing and what we're building towards, and why we think that when we get there, it's going to be so amazing. Um, and I find that this is what people always resonate with the most. And like, people resonate with a story, and then people
Hmm.
feel comforted knowing, okay, and we're tracking all the right things. And people need a mix of that. They need to feel inspired, and then they need to feel grounded and confident.
I love that. How do you create like a story? Because some of the product, I feel like they're very work related, so such as Google Doc, and like, how do you kind of like, obviously, it is like a very impactful product, but
Yeah.
like, how do you tie to like the day to day usage on certain things to something very inspiring?
Yeah. Um, I would say that's maybe maybe the hardest part of the job,
Mhm.
but also the most gratifying and most fun.
Mhm.
And so I think when you're thinking about, the story of why you're doing what you're doing,
Mhm.
actually, in my mind, for it to be authentic and resonate, you have to
Mhm.
have an emotional, personal connection to it.
Mhm.
You have to have, well, why is that for you?
Mhm.
Um, for example, if I take photos, which
Mhm.
is the product that I'm working on now. For
Mhm.
me, why photos is meaningful is that because it connects people in real life. If you think about it, people trust photos with backing up all your precious memories, and we let you reminisce on it, and we let you edit and share it and organize it and put it in albums. A lot of things that you could say, oh, this gives you a lot of utility. This is
Mhm.
like, there are lots of functions that you can complete with this that give you utility. But if you actually step back, you're like, well, the reason why all those functions are meaningful is what human behavior does this cause? And to me, the human behavior that I love the most is like doing things in real life,
Mhm.
complementing that I believe that the digital world should complement a meaningful human life.
Mhm.
And so there are no photos to reminisce on to back up if I'm not out and about
Mhm.
doing things
Mhm.
with my friends, traveling, doing my hobbies. There's nothing to capture, right? And so
Mhm.
actually the reason for being is actually living a meaningful life, connecting with people that you love, doing things that give you meaning, that help you feel like, oh, this is part of my identity. I like, identity is like, reaffirming our identity is
Mhm.
really important human need.
Mhm.
And so going back to those human needs in my mind is the most important, and then making it personal, making it about you. Why is that for you?
Mhm.
Um, and I personally find those to be the most powerful.
For sure. I wonder, so like when you're thinking about building out your own team, like maybe I don't know if you're comfortable sharing how big the team is, or like how do you kind of like think about, how to ensemble like an effective team. And I mean, I'm sure as like a product leader, you probably work with a lot of engineers, design partners, and like there's like, user research people. And how do you kind of like ensemble your own group to like work on a product? And how do you kind of like pick the product that you kind of want to work for?
Yeah. Also a very fun part of the job, for me. I love working with people.
Mhm.
I love coming into the office and traveling around the world and meeting all my team members around the world, and hanging out with them. I'm a very big believer in the magic that is having people who are so passionate about their craft coming
Mhm.
together and building something together. So, of course, there are many things that are common to everyone, but there's also so much domain expertise in engineering, so
Mhm.
much domain expertise in product, so much domain expertise in UX, domain expertise in program management. And so I, really like to build out those functions. And a big part of the job of a leader that's working at big companies, or small companies, but that have smaller companies that have big teams, is actually how you set up your team. And, I feel like that's something that I kind of learned along my career. When I joined Google, I was very junior. And so I used to
Mhm.
think, why are there reorgs all the time? Like,
Mhm.
I wish executives stopped shuffling chairs. But now I understand that actually, you know, your org has to always reflect your top priorities, and
Mhm.
has to address the challenges that you see, so that org can move with a tremendous amount of velocity and focus and urgency and alignment. And and there are ways to structure the org to enable that. And so I think it is a big part of the leader's role and the senior leadership team's role to think about like how the org is set up, make sure that there is sufficient staffing across all functions. It's very common that you can have most functions staffed perfectly, and then one function isn't, and it's like a huge bottleneck, and you're not moving as quickly as you want. It's the leader's job to notice that and fix
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
To make sure that everyone kind of has good swim lanes where they can deliver work and it's clear who's doing what.
Mhm.
Making sure that there's a strong culture so that everyone sees the big picture and feels like we're all working together towards the same thing.
Mhm.
So I think that sometimes, like, when we, especially when people even think about big companies versus small companies, I've worked in both. I've worked in both small and big companies, and I can, and everyone who has knows that um, how we work together, the organization's culture and ability to collaborate those are really the things that actually make teams and products stand out.
Mhm.
Because very magical things happen when humans are able to collaborate effectively.
For sure. I wonder maybe we'll talk about the AI part now, just because I feel like everyone's building in the AI era. What kind of tools are you currently are leveraging at building your own product these days?
Yeah. There's so many cool tools.
Mhm,
Honestly, I really feel the acceleration of what AI allows us to do.
mhm,
I would say all the way from, coding.
mhm,
Definitely all the engineers in my org are using a lot of, the AI tools for coding. And that you can see like the significant impact that's had, positive impact on, all the way from like making tedious coding projects be much easier, to things like code reviews, to things like
mhm,
testing. So I think AI is incredibly powerful in coding.
mhm,
We also use it a lot for research. And so, Google has a deep research tool where you
mhm,
can actually like give Gemini a task to do a deep research. You can say, compare these two products or analyze this industry. And it does a very, very good job of giving you a very in-depth analysis that, I think maybe 2 years ago would have cost you like $50,000 and you'd
mhm,
have to work, on that. And now it's like, oh, it's trivial. You get it back in a few minutes or an hour.
mhm,
So I'd say deep research is very powerful. We have a lot of great, many teams that have been around for a while have
mhm,
a great kind of set of data within the team, be it analytical data, user research data. So we use Gemini on top of this to be able to query and get
mhm,
insights of the data on this data, and that's been
mhm.
incredibly powerful for us. Yeah, and of course, I think people's emails have definitely become more polished. People's docs have definitely become more refined. And I kind of love seeing those micro improvements as well, and kind of saving everyone a lot of time.
For sure. I wonder when it comes to, I guess, like the startup land. So I think a lot of people are, I guess, building product on a no code basis or like, vibe coding. When it comes to like building something at scale. Like, so first of all, I guess like since a lot of our listeners are founders or like who is like technical talent who are building something on their own or like investors. So what are something that you feel like a big company like Google are may not be super excited about that startup actually have space to build?
I definitely think that 0 to 1 has become much
Mhm,
easier in
mhm,
today's world, because it
mhm,
used to be that if you're building an app, it actually, you needed to do quite a bit of engineering work to get that up
mhm,
and running. And I think that that's now, very, very easy to do.
mhm,
The second thing is, I think, given the amazing APIs and model availability in the market, now also kind of everyone can have access to the latest models,
mhm,
to things that can do very powerful things. And I think that is, we're seeing how much creativity that
mhm,
unlocks in the industry and in the ecosystem, and obviously
mhm,
like you can sense the buzz of,
mhm,
all that's possible, given that, a, the technologies are really powerful, and b, it really feels like a time where people are trying out new things. I
mhm,
feel like there are times that you feel like, oh, it's like things have been same old for a while, and then time you feel like, oh my god, every day I wake up
mhm,
and there's a new cool thing, and this definitely feels like more of those
mhm,
times.
mhm,
um and so I think that's true. But look, I think, we often talk about how smaller companies are different than bigger companies, but the reality is actually there are also a lot of similarities.
mhm,
And while I do think that personal productivity can greatly improve with AI, the reality is that, like, you know structural hindrance to productivity by, like, not having the fastest decision making mechanisms, or not having the right org setup, like, that impact small and big companies alike, you know?
Mhm.
So, and I think those, you know, maybe AI can help uncovering some of those bottlenecks, but
Mhm.
it's also, you know, there's still a lot of human work to do to make sure that things are set up for the org to move as quickly as possible.
Mm, I wonder I totally agree with you on, like, though, like, the productivity is improved, but, like, to build things at scale, you still have to, like, really following some sort of, like, procedure to, like, actually, make sure that your product is, like, functioning and everything. When it comes to, I guess, like, buy or build. So I'm sure like, there's a lot of like exciting AI like talent acquisition happening in the market. Um, how how do you think about like, what are some features that we could build in-house versus like what are some stuff that like we could acquire like certain talent from a certain smaller companies to, potentially like find things from outside?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, it's a yes and answer. It's like an
Mhm,
all like it's such an exciting time in the market that it really is all of the above.
mhm,
Um, you know, and I think that they're great tools and they're great companies that people have built, and you can kind of see all the recent acquisitions that have been in the space, and I think they're very exciting. And then sometimes acquisitions are based more on talent, and
mhm,
then you bring in that talent and they either they build that great product within your tool set or help your team in other ways. um I mean, maybe I think, if I'm thinking through a founder lens, I think it is important to kind of begin with the end in mind and be
mhm,
like, okay, well, what are the routes for success here? Um, and I recognize that also sometimes, well, you start with one route and then you pivot, pivot, pivot until you get to a different route, and that's also part of the journey. But regardless, you have to do your best with the information that you know at any given moment. And I think thinking about, okay, well, what does success look like here, given everything happening in the market now, given the landscape and all the other products doing similar things out there, what does success look like for us? And I think, sometimes it's building something at scale, sometimes it's M&A. I think there are many paths to success.
mhm,
And personally, I feel like, I feel like careers are long,
mhm,
and ultimately people also get to do a bunch of different things, and there's a
mhm.
lot of value in that too.
For sure. Speaking of your career, so I want to maybe start with like, how do you build your own personal board of advisors? And I guess like, how do you like kind of navigate to like continuously build the relationship with the mentors or like the peers that you had within the your advisory board?
Yeah, I cannot overstate how important relationships are. So when people either pick my brain when they join Google, or people pick my brain when they join a new company, I always say two things. I say, one, figure out what success looks like for you in this role, and don't
Mhm,
talk to just your manager. Talk to all your peer stakeholders to figure out
mhm,
what success looks like for you in this role. And two, start building relationships now.
mhm,
Relationships take the longest time to build, but those are the most important to invest in.
mhm,
And one of the things that I think has really served me well in my career is nurturing relationships over many years. And I have even stayed in touch with people in my first job, which was at this point several decades ago.
mhm,
And I think that having those relationships, nurturing them, staying in touch,
mhm,
finding ways to have different groups of people that are either similar to you in their challenges, in their level, and what they
mhm,
face, and supporting each other, versus people who are also more senior, or maybe a few steps ahead of you in their career, but can
mhm,
advise you when the time is right, is so, so critical.
mhm,
Um, and and by the way, it takes a bit of skill building, because I know that sometimes it feels very awkward to either reach out and pick
mhm,
someone's brain or kind of stay in touch. It may feel contrived, but you
mhm,
build a muscle of doing it, and you can get good at it, just like you got good at coding or building or fundraising or investing, like everything, no one was born a product manager or a VC
Mhm.
or a founder. Everyone, had whatever skills we learned along the way. And I think building relationships is a skill just like any other, and probably one of the most important ones.
Mm. But how do you figure out, like, who do you build relationship with, and then how do you kind of, like, maintain this relationship? I think,
Yeah.
for example, if I ask you for, like, a coffee chat, and then
Hmm.
obviously, like, if one day you have time, I'm sure, like, you probably coach a bunch of people on their
Hmm.
career. But how do you kind of, like, continuously build the relationship? Because I
Yeah.
think the mentor have also have to feel like they are getting
Yeah.
something out of it, than, like, they're just continuously giving something.
Yeah. I think to kick off the relationship, you probably want something time sensitive, right? So I feel like whenever I've been in a career intersection and I've considered maybe a new role or a different thing,
Mhm,
and I've reached out to those people who are ahead of me in their career, they've always taken the call because it's something very specific. I'm like,
mhm,
I'm debating between a couple of options, would love to pick your brain. People typically say yes to that because they have been in that situation too. And I think, if you're just kind of like reaching out and saying, "Hey, I admire you, would love to get to know you." Yes, I think that's harder.
mhm,
Um, but then after that person, has consulted you, you've consulted them. Well, now is
mhm,
your opportunity to A, let them know how things panned out. B, a few months later, write to them and say how things are going in your new role. Finding ways to lightly stay in touch. And I think people get a lot of value out of it, and
mhm,
especially when they feel like, oh, I think maybe this person is going to do well. Let me stay in touch with them, and that's
mhm,
beneficial too. Um, in my org, I have office hours. And so I have an hour a week that anyone can sign up to meet me. And I'm a big believer in this open door policy. I think it's just
mhm,
really important. Anyone at any level from any function can always find time with me. Um, and then I think for people that I myself mentor, um, similarly, I get a lot of value out of it too. And these are up and coming leaders that I think are already doing great
mhm,
things or are going to do great things. And so, I think that humans in general, like people in general, love to feel like they're useful. They love
mhm,
to feel like they're helpful, and you get a great kick out of being there for someone who needed you.
mhm,
And I think that also it's like one of the things that makes us human,
mhm,
it's this ability to empathize and connect the dots for people, and, do maybe something that isn't like purely analytical if you look at it, but then actually it's extremely, it makes extreme sense if you think about the investment long term.
mhm,
Just like VC investments, right? Like some investments are very, very long term, and that's okay.
mm. I wonder, I totally agree with you. I feel like sometimes, like, providing the mentor, like, feedback, or, like, just, like, telling the mentor that, like, "Hey, I've implemented your advice in my career, and then, like, this is how it helped me," or, like, "This is, like, the result I got." Sometimes I feel like giving the mentor, like, an update, it will help them to, like, understand what's going on too. Um, I wonder if, as for, let's say, when you're managing your own team, like, how do you actually create a team culture? Because I think a lot of people, because living in the startup land, I think the culture at the beginning, before, like, when you have 3 people, it kind of exists as, like, everyone just, like, grind. But when you are running a bigger organization, a lot of times, like, the people that you probably like, you don't have to go through direct hiring for the skip levels, right? So, like, basically, like, you're, I don't know if the skip level only apply to up, or but, like, or, like, maybe
Mhm.
I'm saying maybe people, you're managing someone, and then this person managing someone, right? So, like, how do they kind of stand out to the organization? Because of, like, since, like,
Yeah.
Google is huge, and I want to advance my career from, like, a PM to a VP of
Mhm.
Google one day. How should I kind of, like, plan out my career, and kind of, like, accelerate my career by working on certain, like, exciting projects, or, like, the core kind of, like, Google products?
Yeah, this is something so this is something that leaders of team of any size, but definitely of large teams, spend a lot of time on. Because one, like you say, when you're a 0 to 1 culture, you're trying to just get things out the door and see if
Mhm.
it sticks. That's a very different culture than if you're working than if you're working on a mature product where now it's not just a small team getting something out the
Mhm.
door. Now you have a larger team and you need people to collaborate effectively. And you
Mhm.
sometimes need to be even working on things that may seem contradictory, And for
Mhm.
example, Google One is
Mhm.
a product that if you want to get the best of Google, if you want extra storage and you want our AI features, you can buy it. And we recently announced that we have over 150 million subs, and it's an
Mhm.
amazing product if you're that type of user. But yet also we want to offer a great product to people using the product for free.
Mm.
And so you're kind of doing things that may on paper seem at odds with each other, but really the culture is what helps you make sense of it. It's like, how do we create a culture? How do we understand, look, there's enough headroom for everything here. And
Mhm.
it's not an either or, it's not a zero sum game. And by being super focused on our users and their needs and segmenting them and finding right users at the right time, we can actually have room to grow for both.
Mhm.
And so you do need the culture to evolve, to do things that may seem contradictory, to be able to collaborate at scale so you can move nimbly, even if you're a large team. Because as teams grow, well, what happens is also like you have like now people managing other teams. So you have more managers. And like you said, skip levels, managers of
Mhm.
managers. If they're spending a lot of time coordinating with each other, that may cause all the people below them to be waiting on
Mhm.
whatever it is they're aligning on. And
Mhm.
so you need to make sure that things are happening quickly, that you have the right visibility on some things, that on other things people can run with it. So it actually requires quite a bit of work. And
Mhm.
then you also do it through, so you do it through how you set your OKRs, your KPIs, how you set your strategy, how you set up your teams, and then what meetings do you have? And again, I think that having meetings that will, an all team meeting that brings the whole team together on
Mhm.
a recurring basis every month or every other month, having teams having different meetings for your engineers, your PMs, different functions, having your senior people get together on a regular basis, and then being accountable. I'm a huge fan of QBRs, quarterly business reviews,
Mhm.
which really track accountability and how we're doing towards things, where you're not only saying, okay, we met or exceeded the goal, you're saying, okay, and here's why we didn't, or here's why we over exceeded the goal. That type of accountability can really then trickle down to everyone, be like, okay, this is good, learn from good, this is
Mhm.
not good, okay, let's do something different. So you really need to actually use the time that people have and the organizational shape to make sure that your culture is adapting and adjusting. It's not just a go get it culture. It's more like, okay, well, how do we get it done now with the complexity and maturity of our product?
Mm. I love that. I feel like basically, I guess, like, the on the higher level, when you're a leader at a company, you always have to, like, kind of, like, fix the bottleneck or, like, kind of, like, unblock people from doing things that they to help them, like, get to the milestone that they are getting to. I wonder, in terms of, like, I'm sure, like, there's a lot of, like, maybe people, like, in startups or, like, creating their own companies, like, trying to ask you for advice, like, what is, like, something that most people ask you about and that, like, you kind of find, like, a lot of people have the same kind of, like,
Mm-hmm.
question about it?
Yeah. What are my most frequently asked questions? Um, okay, let's see. In no particular order.
Mhm.
People definitely, when they're joining Google or they've been at Google, they are trying to figure out, okay, how do they continue to grow in their
Mhm.
career?
Mhm.
And by the way, growth comes in many ways. Growth can come from um, growing your team size or your scope, but growth can also comes from learning new skills.
Mhm.
And I'm actually a very big fan of that. An example that I always give is when I joined YouTube to lead YouTube Kids, that was
Mhm.
actually an IC role. And before YouTube Kids, I was already managing a large team. And
Mhm.
many people told me, are you crazy taking an IC role? Like you're already leading a large team. Why would you
Mhm.
do that? but I was so excited about the space. I was so excited about the 0 to 1, but I would learn. And actually, I had the best time being an ICPM for 2 years after many years of management. And so our
Mhm.
careers are not linear in that sense. And I really do
Mhm.
think that sometimes when we don't do the soul searching for what growth really means for us, we can get kind of hung up on the vanities of like
Mhm.
the what it looks like. And I really think it's important to actually do that soul searching of what we want to learn and kind of have a
Mhm.
very long term aperture towards that. So that's one
Mhm.
thing, career growth. Um, the second thing is, people often come to me on like how to navigate influencing,
Mhm.
and especially for product leaders, influencing without authority is a big
Mhm.
thing. And you're kind of like coming in, you're not managing the engineering team, you're not managing the design team, you have to influence. And it
Mhm.
goes back to the relationship point that I talk about. I'm like, okay, well,
Mhm.
tell me about how you're doing it. Well, are you first investing before you withdraw? Many people know this from the famous 7 habits of effective people, is like they say about relationships, you have to invest in the relationship, in the bank of the relationship, before you withdraw. I think for influencing without authority, you have to do that. Otherwise, you're going to go to that person you need something from. You're going to try to withdraw from your, imaginary bank of your relationship. We're going to be like, no, I'm not doing this for you. So you have to proactively think, okay, well, hold on. Before I come pitching my thing, let me understand your thing. What does success look like for you? What are you trying to build? What are your challenges? I find that when we ask these open-ended questions, a solution almost always emerges.
Mhm.
Almost always emerges. You're like, oh, okay, well, actually, that's completely different. Let's talk.
Mhm.
So I do think that influencing without authority and investing in relationships to do that is something else that I talk to people I mentor a lot.
Mhm.
And then yeah, of course, there's always a good chunk of, oh, I take this other role? Why or why not? Let's
Mhm.
think through that. Um, and kind of
Oh,
thinking
let's
through
talk about
those.
that. How do you
Mhm.
think about a separate role? Because I think you also talk about this to your mentor on like, should I do XYZ? Um, how do you think about like, for example, everybody, I'm sure in today's age, like there's like always like recruiter or something coming or headhunters like trying to poach you to do something else. Like, how do you navigate the fact that like there's so much distraction, like everything seems like a potential opportunity, and obviously everybody have their own struggle at their own jobs. Like how do you kind of like navigate the fact that like not being biased about or like romanticize like other different 400 things that you could do to like concentrate on one thing? Basically, how do you kind of like make the decision to like find the next role for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I think there are different kind of layers to it. So I
Mhm.
think first, I think when we think about our careers, it is
Mhm.
important to I like looking them as pyramids.
Mhm.
And it's my belief, and I definitely believe this in this AI world that we're in,
Mhm.
even more so, is that you kind of have to build your foundation.
Mhm.
Like don't over specify, become too niche too quickly. And so
Mhm.
this is why in my career I started out in engineering. When I went to Apple for the summer, I was actually in marketing because I felt like I had a very technical background. I wanted to complement it with marketing and more consumer facing background.
Mhm.
And then I went into product. And even in product, I've always tried to do different things. I started
Mhm.
out docs and groups, they kind of were consumer, but also enterprise. Google Plus was social, YouTube was media, now photos is consumer again. And so I do think, subscriptions, which is like a huge business with a P&L and all that stuff. And I think actually putting those building blocks is really valuable, because then as you're
Mhm.
thinking out where you're building out your career, you can actually go in many different routes. And you're
Mhm.
not kind of pigeonholed to a certain area, which in the age of AI, also some of
Mhm.
these areas are greatly transformed. So, I think it is important when we're earlier in our career. And by the way, I still see myself as like having many, many more
Mhm.
years in my own personal career to continue building that
Mhm.
out. When engaging with people who try to hire you or you try to hire or whatever,
Mhm.
people are people. I think we forget that. I think we get like very hung up on the company and whatnot. But actually, like, it's been my experience that, you know, you know, first of all, even though you may get approached, even though you're not looking to move, but if you feel like, wow, this company is interesting to me long term,
Mhm.
maintain the relationship. And then when it is time for you to move, then it's not a cold start. Then, you heard them, you said, look, it's not a good time, but I love the company, let's stay in touch. That's such a different conversation to have than when you're kind of like so done with your role and now you're like, oh my god, I can't wait for the next thing, and then you have to start all that. So I think people are reaching out to you and the company is interesting to you, be in touch. Doesn't mean you need to move, but I think it's important to form and nurture those long-term relationships.
Mhm.
And the biggest roles I've had in my career were actually always after we talked about other roles previously, but it wasn't the right role or the right time, and I think things do pan out in that way. And then the last thing I would say about choosing your next role, look, it's hard. Like, there's no, I think there's so many dimensions you can look at things. But in my mind, it's a mix of, one, are you excited about the space? And is the space a fast growing space? So I
Mhm.
think people come to me hyper fixated on their scope. And I always tell them, are you excited about the company? Are you excited about the org within the company? Do you think
Mhm.
that they're going to grow like crazy because everything that's happening in the market? Then take a seat on that rocket ship. You can always move seats within the rocket ship, but you want to
Mhm.
be in a high growth area that you feel like you can learn.
Mhm.
Two, do you have ideas for what can make them successful? Like,
Mhm.
especially for leadership roles, what do you think you're going to do that other smart people before you didn't do? So
Mhm.
it's not like, oh, I'll figure it out. Like, think about actually what you would do and get convinced that those are some of the ideas that you would try out,
Mhm.
and would enjoy doing, because the grass is always greener when they're just pitching you, but actually think of the day-to-day work. And three, chemistry. I think you just need to feel really good about the peers you're meeting, about the manager. I think those elements are really critical.
I love that. I wanna be mindful of the time. Maybe we do, like, a quick 30-second fire round for you. What's your favorite book?
Oh my gosh, favorite book. I have so many. I read a lot. So let's see. Um I'm reading, hold on, it's a culture book. So
Love
it
that.
talks about The Secret of Our Success,
Mhm.
by Joseph Henrich. It's actually not a new book. So I love all the like Sapiens books, all of Ezra Klein's
Mhm.
books, all books that talk about why humans are like they are. I'm very
Oh my
passionate about
god.
humans.
Psychology stuff.
It's
Sociology.
anthropology, but what I love about the Secret for Our Success is that it talks about how humans, we like to think that we're so special because we're so smart, and actually we are smart, but it's actually not just because of our individual smartness. It's because of our ability to learn from each other and collaborate and
Mhm.
have cultures that are really strong, that humans have become
Mhm.
what they are. And I strongly, strongly believe in that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think especially important in this age of AI, where we've kind of built these things that are actually potentially even smarter than us. Um,
Mhm.
and I think like being human in that world,
Mhm.
is really critical. And then I'd recommend another book on that topic, which is completely different angle, but really interesting
Mhm.
read. It's called How to Be Animal. And it talks
Mm.
about not humans as like just about being smart, but actually what is it in how we operate as animals, as similar to animals, not different than animals, that make us really unique. So
Wow.
two books
I'm
on two bookends of the same topic: How to Be Animal and The Secret of Our Success.
I will totally check it out. So who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh my gosh, there have been so many. Um, I would say, okay, three people. One person, my husband, who I met in college. And honestly, we studied computer science together. And I was such a bad computer science student, and he helped me stick it out. And I wouldn't be here today if I didn't stick out that computer science degree. So that's one.
Mhm.
2 is Jonathan Rosenberg, who was the SVP product for Google,
Oh, yeah,
and
he has a book too,
yeah, he has many
right? Yeah.
books, which I recommend, and he's been a personal mentor to me all these years. And then 3, and actually, someone I miss every day, Susan Wojcicki, who was my boss at YouTube, and someone I learned from so much, and I admire to emulate in everything I do.
Mhm.
She's the best.
Uh, Iconic. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party? Ezra Klein, if you're listening to this, I've heard you talk so much. I would love to have you at a dinner party. I just really love people who are intellectual and curious about the world. So he would be my top choice.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Um, so I have 3 kids, so you'll find me schlepping them around all across the Bay Area for all their various things. Um, we did a big RV trip this summer,
Mhm.
so that was super fun. We went to the national parks in
Mhm.
Oregon and Northern California. Yeah, I love the great outdoors. I love art. You can find me in museums.
Love that. Well, Shimrit, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation. And I feel like it's like a career growth masterclass for PMs and the rest of the tech community.
Yeah, well, thank you, Grace, for having me, and to everyone who dialed in live. Thank you so much. And yeah, Silicon Valley is a small place, so I hope to see everyone around.
Amazing. Let me quickly end stream. It's taking